والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلوات ربي وسلامه عليه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, it's an important topic that we're discussing tonight, and it is one that's a continuation of last year, Suicide Awareness Month here in the United States, and we were able to have a wonderful conversation around this topic, an important conversation last year with Sister Sada Radwan and Sheikh Joe Bradford, and alhamdulillah, we're able to have Sister Sada Radwan back with us today, inshallah, as well as Sheikh Ibrahim. Today we're going to be addressing misconceptions with regards to suicide. If anybody would like to watch last year's Friday Night Lights, it was called Suicide, the Elephant in the Room, Suicide in the Muslim Community. And a lot of important information was shared there. You'll find it on our YouTube channel. But today, inshallah ta'ala, specifically the conversation is going to be around misconceptions with regards to suicide. And there are a lot of misconceptions that we harbor that affect our ability to engage people positively before they take that final step. And so, inshallah, we'll be addressing some of them today, inshallah ta'ala. For Sister Sada Radwan is a graduate. Actually, she graduated. That's an update from last year. Alhamdulillah, she was a graduate student last year, but she graduated from the University of Houston Clear Lake with her master's in clinical mental health counseling, and she's also working as a counseling intern at a local nonprofit called Community Health Network, seeing clients of all ages. And she's been a mentor and youth leader in our community for many years, alhamdulillah. And she is licensed. Yes.
Like provisional license?
Provisional license.
Yeah.
And inshallah, she is working to bring everything that she's learned back to the Muslim community and offer counseling that brings Islam and therapy together, alhamdulillah. As for Sheikh Ibrahim, he needs no introduction. He is our resident imam and sheikh here in Clear Lake Islamic Center for many years, alhamdulillah, and inshallah many more. So that being said, we wanted to start with common misconceptions with regards to suicide. And so I think one of the most popular is that simply mentioning suicide and simply talking about suicide is going to cause people to commit it. Like you're putting the idea out there into people's minds, and it will grow and it might cause someone to act on it. So Sada, if you could just elaborate on this particular misconception.
Yeah, that's definitely a common one. It's a taboo subject, right? Speaking about suicide in general, it's normal to feel uncomfortable talking about the death of someone, especially if it's someone who's had killed themselves. It's very normal to feel uncomfortable, but actually we know through research and just in general that when we do talk about it and bring awareness to it and talk about, what are the treatment methods, how can we support someone who is struggling with that, it actually helps people who are struggling feel more comfortable to actually share, right? So it makes it normal to have these conversations. It makes it normal for them to say like, hey, I actually have those suicidal thoughts, or I am struggling and I do need some help, or now that I hear you talking about it, I feel more comfortable talking about it too. And that's one situation, right, where we could talk about suicide is in a space like this. Another time where we could bring it up is if someone does share that they are like struggling with suicidal thoughts, and actually asking them directly is more likely going to help save them, right, as opposed to make them want to do it. Because if you're asking someone like directly and kindly, like, are you having thoughts of suicide? Like, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. They're probably gonna, share. They're gonna have a space where you're, supporting them, comforting them, and it's gonna give them some time to actually get that help that they need. So definitely talking about it, I would say, is very important, and we need to have more conversations about this. Just like if you guys could imagine like talking about mental health. So I'm in my late 20s now, but when I was growing up, like middle school, high school years, it wasn't common to talk about like mental health or therapy or getting help that way, right? I think it was more recent in the last like 5 years where we're talking about it more. It's getting less destigmatized. And so same thing, it's now time for suicide to be brought in that conversation as well, so it becomes less stigmatized and more people are now more likely to ask for help. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sheikh Ibrahim, do you have...
Well, talking about it is important because you open the conversation with the person who wants to, who maybe hasn't decided yet, but they're thinking seriously about committing suicide. So you open the conversation with them to explore options for them so they can open up. Maybe Sister Sarah mentioned, like buying time sometimes. Give them the time to seek help. Also, you yourself can, if you're able to talk about it and try to, people who are trained to do that will be able to actually try to explore with the person about the root causes and why they want to do that, and that if it is about being depressed or about losing hope, that they have options, that there are better options for them, and that treatment is there, that a better option than just ending your life is there. So it is opening the conversation. That's what it is. Yes.
There are, this idea of if I ask them point blank, that will cause them to pause. What about asking them is going to cause them to pause, is what I would think. Like, what is it about me asking them, are you thinking about suicide, that would cause them all of a sudden to recalibrate their thoughts or hesitate, or what would be, if you have a,
Yeah.
and can you just raise your microphone
Okay.
up higher?
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
So, good question. I think what would cause them to pause is that someone is finally asking them that question, right? Because most likely they probably haven't told many people that they're struggling with these thoughts. So now that someone is maybe asking them, like, hey, I noticed that you've been feeling really down, or I'm noticing some sudden shift in your behavior. Like, are you struggling with something? Are you having thoughts of maybe hurting yourself? That to someone would make them be like, wait, they now know, wait, I could now finally have a space to actually say, wait, someone cares. And that's a big deal for someone who's been like struggling in silence and suffering. And for a lot of us, we're in the Muslim community, and we have to be honest. Like, sometimes we kind of have this facade that we have to be strong, right? We're strong, we're Muslim, we're religious, so like anything that you're going through, like be like your parents and just kind of deal with it and suck it up. But then that makes it, again, not okay to share what's truly happening inside, and someone could really be struggling. And so when you're asking them directly, it's giving them that chance that this secret, this thing that they've been holding on to, they're now able to actually share it, and someone is there to actually listen and care.
Something that idea of be strong and be like your parents, you mentioned something I remember in the last session that stuck with me, which was when parents actually showcase their vulnerability and they tell their stories and they tell about the difficulties that they went through when they were kids, that actually might create a lot of hope in a child, that they don't see themselves as actually an anomaly or being different. And so if a parent tells a child that they were bullied, and a child is being bullied, that they don't see themselves as being something is necessarily wrong with them, but rather this is something that their parents survived through, and they were able to thrive, and they were able to grow as well. And so Sheikh Ibrahim, this topic of bullying as well, I think, is also a misconception with regards to suicide, because there is, I think, number one, a misconception with regards to bullying itself, whether it exists. Like, these kids are online, they're on their phones, like, what bullying? They're not being thrown into trash cans, they're not being thrown into lockers, the hazing isn't there like it used to be before. Is bullying, you teach teenagers and middle schoolers, correct?
Yeah.
At Islam Academy? You've been
Yeah.
doing that for many years. So what are you seeing on the ground? Is
So-
bullying gone?
No, definitely not. It just took on a different form. The thing is, what is about bullying that really makes the person in danger is how it makes the person feels, right? I mean, if you get beat up once, it's not going to really end your life just because you got beat up once, right? And so, it happens sometimes, which is wrong, definitely. But the thing about bullying is the bully is exerting authority upon a person to make them feel, disgraced, ashamed of themselves, to make them feel down, to destroy their self-esteem, to control them. And these are, self-esteem is an essential human feeling and self-worth. So the bullied, the person who's a victim of bullying, they are questioning their self-worth. and their self-image is tarnished, is destroyed. Here's a person who is in control of their fear, like they are afraid. So it's not about physical now. It's about the constant control of one person, whether online, and it happens online a lot, the shaming, the tarnishing of their reputation, the speaking about, things that are shameful about the person, whether true or lie, doesn't really matter. The effect is the same. It's tarnishing, it's destroying the person's self-worth. And that is a recipe for someone to just want to hide and disappear. And hide and disappear means and online is even worse, because how can you disappear? Your laundry is all over the place.
Yeah.
Everybody knows about you now, whether it's true or false. That is, cyberbullying is even more dangerous than actual bullying that you see in school that ends up with physical. And even with the actual bullying, where there's a physical consequence, sometimes the anticipation of physical hurt is worse than the physical hurt itself, right? And all of you probably are familiar with the episode with SpongeBob when he was bullied by Flask. Flask was running after him, and SpongeBob, for 2 weeks, he was afraid and tired, and showing you really the effects of bullying. And kids are looking, these are, and finally, he gets hurt. And Flask is unable to hurt him because he's a sponge, right? Finally, he realizes that the anticipation of the hurt is worse than the hurt itself. And that's a problem with bullying. It's a constant, around-the-clock fear.
Pressure.
Yes, and pressure.
So that's a misconception. Now, the relationship between bullying and suicide itself.
Well, okay, suicide, when people who have suicidal thoughts are those who have lost all belief in themselves, all belief in the worth of their life. Like, my life is not worthy. And the victims of bullying, and there are a lot of examples where victims of bullying committed suicide. A lot of examples. And that's one of the major reasons and root causes of suicide, is that they want to disappear. They want to end the hurt. They want to end the problem. They want to gain control. Now, this person is controlling my life. I want to take control back by ending my life, meaning this is my way of exerting control over that person who's bullying me.
No.
Right.
So, with regards to a third misconception with regards to suicide, you said that person doesn't feel like their life is worth anything. So, from the outside looking in, another misconception is that person who reached that conclusion, that they weren't loved or cared enough by their family or parents or what have you. People then start, or maybe even the parents might feel like they didn't do enough. Is that really the case?
No. Yeah, so especially for, let's say, a parent who lost like a child to suicide, or even like a husband or wife who lost a partner or a loved one in general, it's very hard on the family, right? Because there's a lot of maybe blame, like self-blame or guilt, or just like grief that like I loved them, or maybe I didn't love them enough, maybe I didn't show them enough care, and that's the reason why they died by suicide. But people don't die by suicide generally because they weren't loved. It's not that their mom or dad didn't love them enough, or their friends didn't love them enough. It's usually, like Sheikh Ibrahim was saying, they went through they're going through so much significant pain and distress, and add to that the hopelessness factor. So that's what we see with a lot of suicidal clients, is that they're very hopeless, they're in despair, that things won't change, that their life won't get better, that things are never gonna be, that burden that they're carrying is never gonna be lifted. So that pain, the emotional suffering, whatever suffering they're going through, and then that hopelessness together, that's why that they find suicide as a means of escape. So it's not that they don't wanna be here, it's not that they don't feel loved, it's that they just want all the pain to end. So as a parent or someone who might have had like a loved one die by suicide, it's not that they weren't giving them enough love or they didn't give them enough love or care. It's just that they were going through so much, and they thought this was the only solution, which of course we know that that's not the only solution.
So this idea of pain, you mentioned pain. I have a question for you. This is a real question. I was coming across an unfortunate case of a 13-year-old who committed suicide from our community somewhere. And one of the shock responses from a person was, 13 years old, they haven't even lived for them to want to opt out of this world. Like, what pain does a 13-year-old experience? Like, they haven't even felt pain yet. They haven't even become adults and gone. Can a 13-year-old have already experienced that level of pain?
Level of pain to want to end their life? So a 13-year-old, we know that like psychologically their brain development it's not fully developed, right? We say that the brain develops around fully completely 25 and above. So at that, a 13-year-old with their immature kind of brain development, their underdeveloped coping skills, that means they don't realize that there are so many other ways to cope, that there are so many reasons to live, that there is hope out there. So yeah, them going through something severe, and again, we don't know what they went through, but let's say they went through they got raped, or they were abused, or they were, again, bullied severely. For a 13-year-old, again, with the underdeveloped coping skills, underdeveloped brain, of course, to them, suicide could seem as, this is the only way I could end all the pain I'm going through. So we definitely can't, we can't we can't view a 13-year-old's life and what they think is right or wrong from our kind of mature, wise, older self. We have to realize that the pain that anyone is going through, it's so different, it's so unique to them, that maybe you'll never experience that pain, or maybe you'll go through something exactly the same, but you don't have suicidal thoughts and the other person does. There's so many other reasons there too, right? So in general, we know that also suicidal thoughts, there is a genetic component to it, right? So if someone has a mental health gene that runs in their family, that they're more likely to have suicidal thoughts or just mental health illnesses. And also there are so many risk factors. So if they don't have support, if they went through traumas, if they went through a lot of changes, big distressors in their life, that could cause someone to have suicidal thoughts. So I don't know if I answered the question.
You did. Jazakallah khair. So you mentioned risk factors, Sheikh Ibrahim. There's another misconception, which is there are no warning signs to suicide. Are there warning signs? What are these?
Well, there are warning signs.
Are there a lot of cries for help that we're supposed to recognize beforehand?
Yeah, what I would say is, the person doesn't just hide all of a sudden. And what happens is that there will be, progression to this, to just, wanting to go from deciding to commit suicide to actually doing it. They're not going to do it all of a sudden. They're going to take, days, weeks, months sometimes. I know of a case where, there are warning signs from the beginning where, that they were ignored by the parents or by the community or by the peers or by the school teachers, and the person, ended up taking his own life. And these warning signs were there for a couple of years. In our community, we actually are not educated in this. As a Muslim community, we really need to be educated on trying to find out these warning signs. Like, for example, withdrawal, one of the warning signs. The person likes to be isolated, and not all of a sudden they just want to be isolated. And you could find,
What does that look like? They turn off their phone, they're inaccessible?
Yeah, something like this. You can't access them. They don't come to activities that they used to come, for example. And they had gone through issues, and they may actually say something to the effect of, life is not worth living, for example. Words like this, phrases like this, or be actually very more even frank about it. Says, I'm thinking to take my own life, or things like this. The person would not enjoy the activities that they used to enjoy. The person would lose weight, for example, because they're not eating regularly as they used to. You could find, the person is start to cut, cutting to, compensate or substitute for the pain that they feel inside with an actual pain to distract their brain from the actual pain that they feel, the pain of hopelessness, things of that nature. They're not enjoying the companionship of their friends anymore. They don't want to talk to their friends anymore. They're not talkative anymore, or you can't access them. There are warning signs. Sometimes these warning signs are there for a long time, and they are sometimes a cry for help. There are sometimes a cry for help where, please help me before I can do this. I'm waiting for someone to come and, tell me, convince me, show me that I should really live, or show me that my life is worth living. Give me some hope. There are warning signs, and I don't think, I think people who are close to these individuals can see that, but they need to be a little more empathetic, a little more caring. And I'm not judging the people here that they're not paying attention, but honestly, parents need to pay close attention to their children.
But how do you differentiate between the withdrawal of a normal teenager up in their room, what have you, and the withdrawal of these types of, as a parent, I would imagine it's very hard to navigate the different types of withdrawals.
Yeah, I was going to mention, so the common factor between all these warning signs is that it could be just someone who's just having a rough time. It could be a typical teenager just, going through their issues. It could be just someone having, they're burnt out from work or just life, and so they just need a break from everyone. Or it could be someone who is undergoing all that and also having suicidal thoughts. So the main idea is to just check in, right? It's whether or not they're having suicidal thoughts, you still want to check in with someone who you did notice, maybe they've been going to CLIC and now suddenly they're not anymore, or you've realized they don't respond to your messages, or any of the signs that Sheikh Ibrahim said. So you just want to check in. You want to actually reach out and just be like, hey, I noticed you haven't been here. Or if it's something more serious, like Sheikh Ibrahim said, they actually say, I just feel like there's no purpose in my life. Then that's like a signal, okay, so they actually maybe are having those thoughts.
And in the case of teenagers, by the way, teenagers do not. One of the signs of thinking of when they're having suicidal thoughts, they don't show depression. They show anger, more like anger with life, anger with things that they are upset the whole time. They may not show that they're depressed. They may actually be, doing well in school, having good grades, but they're angry. They're angry with everybody, angry about the system, angry about even not praying anymore. They're angry. They don't want to pray. Angry. They don't want to, be with their friends. They're angry with the people that they shouldn't be angry with. They're just angry. Angry because they're struggling with the thought that, I love life, but I want to end it because it's not worth living. That's the struggle that they have. Teenagers have, naturally they love life. They're not like older people. When they want to commit suicide, they get depressed. No, so that's a.
So they're angry that life isn't measuring up to what they wanted it to be.
It could be that.
I'm wondering, are these warning signs different between girls and boys? Are any of them gender specific? So is anger, for example, more of a male type of reaction versus female, or what have you?
I definitely think things are more specific to genders. There's a lot of overlap. Like, for example, when we say substance use and drugs, there is, for males in general, that's something that they might turn to more than females. For females, there is more of the maybe wanting to self-harm. It's still in both. There is overlap, but we're saying what could be more on each side. But in terms of the anger, like you mentioned, maybe the anger, aggression, even violence could be more of a male form of showing, of their extreme feelings. For females, it would be more of the depression side, again, keeping to themselves or just having those emotional ups and downs. With a lot of overlap in between. So I don't want to say there is any specific, but there definitely could be some that are drawn more to specific signs.
Now, when you have that person who's acting out, when you have that person who's cutting themselves or what have you, one of the misconceptions presented is that, or one of the things that we kind of default to is that they're doing it to seek attention. I mean, they just want people to notice them or what have you, the reason why they're doing all of this. So is that truly the case, or is that another warning sign?
So I think for sure, so whether or not they're doing it for attention, I think what's more concerning is if they're doing it, if that's the reason why they're doing it, and that's the only way that they could actually ask for help or show that they're in so much distress, is by saying, I want to kill myself, or self-harming, right? So that would be the more concerning part. But in either case, we should always take someone's, cry for help, whether it's cutting or they're talking about it or they're angrily telling their parent, I'm gonna go kill myself. We should always take it seriously, even if they say it all the time, because I know that's a common, sometimes I hear that from parents, is that maybe my daughter or son are saying that, like, do I ignore that? Or are they just saying it for attention? Either way, we need to make sure we address it. Like, why are they saying that? Because again, when someone is sharing, whenever they are having that cry for help, there is a reason. What's driving that pain? What's going on that's making those thoughts come, right? Because in most cases, suicidal thoughts don't just happen just like randomly, like they're super happy and then suddenly a thought comes, right? In most cases, that's not the case. It's because there is a driver. There is a reason why those thoughts are popping up. So let's address why are you saying that so many times, or why are you self-harming? There's a reason that's causing you to have this much pain and feelings of hopelessness. So definitely not kind of going with that it's for attention. No, it's either way, we got to give it attention if they are kind of sharing that.
You see, think about, whether it's mental health or emotional distress, which both can cause, internal pain, that emotional pain. And sometimes it's not about suicide. Sometimes it's about, derailing the, your brain focus from the emotional pain that you cannot deal with into an actual pain that can distract you. And I've been reading about bipolar and some of the mental diseases, and they say once I cut and I saw the blood, I felt a relief. And I'm not saying this is not a solution. It's not a solution at all. It's just because now they were able to rewire their brain, where the brain has different chemicals going on now, that they're not feeling the emotional pain, but they're dealing now with the immediate pain that they're feeling now, but then the emotional pain will come back. So it's not a solution at all. And it could be not a sign for someone who wants to commit suicide, but it's really concerning and it has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, children who cut or teenagers who cut, is their inability to deal with the emotional, the overwhelming emotional distress that they're feeling because of, first of all, them being adolescents, and secondly, not finding validation of their emotions or a way to express their emotions within their environment, whether it's a family, it could be a dysfunctional family, it could be, broken family, whatever it is, they're not able to deal with that. So they start self-harm, and they're not going to show you. And that's why you find them a lot of times wearing long sleeves, because they don't want to show you what's going on. I mean, I advise you to read the book. It's called The Lost Child, which is a true story about this person whose mother was very abusive of him, that he used to cut because he wants to get rid of that pain that his mother, the source of his love, abusing him. And it's a very true story, and yeah, he used to cut because of that. So things like this can happen when you have a family that is not empathetic or not accommodating emotionally for the changes that the adolescent is going through.
So that could be a factor, and it could also be a non-factor. So you could have a family that's supportive and gives them all of the emotional platform and all of that type of stuff, and they still end up being suicidal.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, they could. So basically, a family that is supportive, we'll say that's a protective factor, in that it most likely it will help. It will be definitely something that protects them from going to that point. But if someone does go to that point, again, it doesn't mean it was because of the family. They didn't show them enough love. It could be so many other factors out there, right? Like we said, it could be abuses or traumas that they've been through.
Could you describe this word that you just said, protective factor? So
Yeah.
what does that mean?
So when we say like for any like mental health issue or symptom, so suicidal thoughts would be a mental health symptom, we say that there is protective factors and there's risk factors for someone who might have the symptom. A protective factor would be things that would protect them from kind of getting to that point where they have the symptom or for it being severe. And then a risk factor is the opposite, things that would make it kind of like more likely or easier for them to fall and have that symptom. So a protective factor would be like, yeah, having a supportive family. Even being close to religion could be one. That's a protective factor for many of us. A protective factor would be like being financially supported, you know, having a roof over their head, having food. A protective factor is having friends, having stability, having community. And then risk factors would be like having a non-supportive family. So that could be a risk factor, or having been through abuse or traumas. Having had severe, like big changes happening in their life, maybe they moved a lot. Risk factor could be if they're on drugs, if they've been taking alcohol. Risk factor could be being in relationships, being bullied, relationships that aren't good for them. So those are what we say protective and risk factors. So for sure, a supportive family is a protective factor, but that's not the only thing that would help a person who is feeling suicidal thoughts.
So I want you to elaborate on the protective family or the supportive family, just because that's also a misconception that we have, which is that if a person is on that track, there's nothing necessarily that you can say or do to be able to help them.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. So I want to kind of backtrack real quick. Just in general, when we're talking about suicidal thoughts, so I think maybe we might have an image in our head of someone who's like really, really depressed and they're having suicidal thoughts and they want to act on it right away. But actually, in general, like suicidal thoughts, we all kind of experience that at one point in our life or another. Suicidal thoughts meaning like, I wish I wasn't here anymore, or I just want to be in Jannah right now, right? Thoughts where it's like, oh, like life is so difficult, I don't want to be here. So suicidal thoughts like that are very common, and we might experience that one or another. Then it goes to the more active suicidal thoughts where maybe someone is thinking about it frequently, they're kind of stuck there, and they feel like there's no way out and they want to act on it. So for a case like that, when it comes to protective factors, so you're asking more about like the family aspect, or like how could a family
or friends?
Yeah, what could a family do to help someone like that?
Yeah.
So definitely knowing the warning signs is so important. So if you do notice, you do feel, you don't have to ask everyone right now, like, are you suicidal, right? If you do notice that someone maybe has some of those warning signs, just kind of being like, telling them like, hey, I noticed you've been feeling kind of down. Is there something going on? When someone is going through a lot of issues, sometimes they feel like life isn't worth living. Is that something you've ever thought of? So asking them directly could actually be very helpful. And again, it will give them that time to know that like someone is listening, someone is caring. For most of the people who are struggling, it's that they haven't shared it with someone, or they don't think there is any answers. So if you could be that one person that just offers a little bit of hope. We're not asking anyone to be like a therapist or like a mental health professional and to start, I'm going to save your life right now, because it's not on us. All we could do is just instill some hope and some support for those that we know are struggling, and then getting them to that point where it's like, okay, let's get you help. There is like so much help, and you're not alone, and so many people are struggling with this as well. Let's try to get you some support and see if it helps you. So doing those things for sure can definitely help someone who is suicidal, and help them, again, give them that time where they realize there's another way, there's another solution.
And I think one of the important parts is that you validate their feelings. You don't discount their feelings. You don't dismiss their feelings. A lot of them, when someone is feeling that way and feeling depressed or feeling down, or feeling unable to deal with the challenges of life, that you validate that.
What does validating sound like? Like what's a good validating line?
Like, for example, you don't shame them for feeling that way. A lot of times, parents sometimes do that, where they shame their children for feeling that way.
I'll give you one. Sorry for interrupting. That sounds so difficult. That must be really hard. That sounds like it's been extremely hard on you. What have you been managing? Those are just like validating
Right.
responses, right? We're not trying to offer solutions. When someone is, sharing and opening up about really deep or painful things, we want to like listen, be with them in their pain, even though internally you might be like, oh my God, what's happening? What should I say? All you got to do is just like listen and then just kind of say like, wow, you're going through so much. Is there something that I could do? Should we try to find you some support? And just be like kind and just think about what you would want if someone, comes, if you tell someone your issues, what would you want to hear from them? Most people don't want like answers right away. I know there's a whole men versus women debate on that, but when they're really struggling, they don't want someone to be like, do this and like, yes, life is worth living and you need to just like, be happy and Allah is going to be mad if we don't want to hear any of that. It's just like validating. Again, this is so
Right.
hard. That sounds really difficult. You're so strong for going through all of this
Yes.
and doing it by yourself, just things like
Right.
that. Yeah.
And basically, from my conversations with kids, is that I asked them, what would you like your parents to hear? And they would say, well, I just want my parents to listen to me without trying to give me feedback. I don't want to hear their feedback. I don't want to hear solutions from them. I just want them to hear me and just let me talk. And let me talk and for them to just listen and not do anything, not give me feedback, not ask me about my grades, not ask me why you're feeling that way. Just hear me out. And so this can help. And at least it will open, the gate for conversation where, you're able to find out and you're able to gain their trust where they can actually share with you what their feelings are.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I was going to ask you, Sheikh Ibrahim, because you talk a lot with kids, you teach, teenagers, preteens. They are notorious for not speaking. Teenagers, at least. They're notorious for not speaking. And so if you're an adult talking to someone or you're talking to a teenager, they're giving you one-word answers or what have you, and you're not actually able to draw out that conversation that they might need,
Right.
and that you want to have from them. What advice would you have?
Well, it depends on how you come in. Like, for example, I'm a teacher, right? If I come to them as a teacher, they're not going to open up to me. They're not going to. I'm their teacher. I have an authority. I control their grades.
Okay, well, a parent is a parent. They can't.
And the parent,
okay.
the same thing. There's an authority. One kid actually said something today. She said, I wish every parent has a switch that can switch from a parent to a friend.
That's cute.
Sometimes if they can switch the mode, like now you're on parent mode, so I can be ready to deal with you as my parent. Mm-hmm. Now I'm on a friend mood, so I can talk to you as a friend. So no, they're not going to talk to you until you build a rapport with them. And what happens is that don't force them to talk. Just be there for them. Be there for them. Be ready. Give them time. Give them access. Don't just sit there and say, oh, you're not going to talk, so I'm leaving. No, they want you to be there. And give them time. You ask them silly questions. Ask them very curious questions. Very casual questions. How's your day? What did you eat for breakfast? Things like this. Silly, that's inconsequential. Just breaking the ice, because actually between you and them there's a whole block of ice that you need to break in order for them to get their heart. You need to actually have them be interested in talking to you, and the only way they can be interested in talking to you is, one, that they trust you, that they really trust you, that you're not going to be judging them, because they're worried about this. They're worried about being judged. Because they are struggling with their self-image, with their self-worth, with their self-esteem. They're struggling. Now, if I have a problem with my self-esteem, and I know that talking to you is going to destroy my self-esteem, I will never talk to you.
Yeah.
And we are adults. I avoid certain people because every time I talk to them, they're just going to put me down. So I'm not going to talk to them. Same thing with kids. They're not going to talk to you until you give them assurances that you will be supporting them. You will be helping them. You will be accepting them no matter what they say, how silly it is, how outrageous it is. It doesn't matter. You will hear them out, and you will be their friend. Build a rapport. Let them trust you. Remove that authority. Forget, I always say with parents, forget about your ego. There is no ego when you are a parent. A parent and a child, the child is going to stumble all over you. And they're designed to hurt you. And that's how it's supposed to be. So you're going to have to actually be patient with them and accept it and let them experiment their emotions with you. And finally, you will get them to safety. That's your job, to get them to safety. Because adolescence is a very, very difficult stage in life that is filled with challenges, filled with fire inside, filled with energy, which they can't do anything about, and hormones. And we put them in places and we give them so much expectation that, go figure now, how am I going to deal with all of this? And that's where sometimes they get emotionally detached. So that's what I would advise. Yes.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya ala salat. Hayya ala salat. Hayya ala falah. Hayya ala falah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.
Can you give me back the change? Give me back the change. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Give me back the change, okay? Bring it back.
Listen, don't bring back the change.
Bring me back the change.
Don't bring back the change. Run.
You can bring it back here.
طيب, alhamdulillah, sallallahu ala rasulillah. So, just wrapping up some misconceptions, and then want to open up the floor, inshallah ta'ala, for your comments and questions as well. Another common misconception is that therapy won't work for somebody who's suicidal. So as far as, mental health, there are areas where therapy works, and there are some things that even therapy can't help with.
Yeah.
What have you seen?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen that in so many cases, someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts, therapy does help. So therapy and even medication, like psychiatric medication, which is also another stigma point maybe in our community and just in general, is taking medication for mental health. So what we know through the research is that therapy and medication kind of provides the best outcomes for anyone who is going through a severe mental illness, including also experiencing suicidal thoughts. So we know for sure through the research that that's the case. And I think something that's interesting too that I learned earlier this year is that the Prophet ﷺ, so he actually recommended for people, so anyone who was going through a lot of grief or something like depression or just had a lot of mental health pain, he recommended for them to take, to basically make a kind of barley soup. It's called talbina. So this was narrated by Aisha, who said the Prophet ﷺ said that. And the Prophet said that when someone takes this, eats this kind of barley porridge soup, it actually helps ease some of their sadness, some of their depression, and it kind of lifts up their heart too. And I thought it was pretty amazing, right? That the Prophet is saying, take this thing because it might help lift some of that, the grief, the depression that someone's experiencing. And of course, there's always psychologists and Muslim researchers who want to know what's in this talbina, what's in this barley that is also maybe scientific. And so when they did a research about it, they found out that actually in this barley kind of mix, there is amino acids that actually improve the likelihood of serotonin. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter that helps with our mood regulation, right? It helps with mood stabilizing and anxiety and things in our body. And so actually eating this could actually increase the likelihood of producing that serotonin, which helps with your mood and helps lift depression and anxiety, which is technically a type of psychiatric medication. I'm trying to connect it somehow. But anyways, so the Prophet ﷺ was open for us to trying different means to help our mental health, to help someone who's struggling. So we should also use those means as well, right? Those are also means that Allah has given us, whether it's therapy, whether it's psychiatric medication, whatever the case may be. If someone is kind of going through suicidal thoughts or having mental illness, it is actually kind of mandatory on them to get some help so that they don't end up harming themselves. So definitely therapy and or medication can help a lot of people who do experience suicidal thoughts.
Sheikh Ibrahim, there must be a lot of serotonin in pizza.
Yeah, there is. Definitely.
I always feel better after pizza.
Now sometimes it really helps. I mean, most of the time, people have, let's say this feeling of hopelessness is because of their, spiritual, hunger for fulfillment. And, definitely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He put a soul in our body, He gave that soul the nourishment, which is, the dhikr, the recitation of the Quran, the prayer, and the dua, and the, trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You really cannot ignore that human being is both body and soul, and if the soul is starved, you will not have a balanced person. And we know the effect of the prayer on the levels of, let's say, the serotonin and the mood of the person. We know that sometimes if you have issues with painful memories, that dhikr can help you, dua can help you. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ once entered the masjid and found Abu Umama was sitting there, and he looked really depressed and sad, and he asked him, why are you feeling that way? And he told him that he's overwhelmed with debt and responsibilities, and he's very anxious. The Prophet ﷺ told him, say this dua every morning, once in the morning or once in the evening. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hasan, wa a'udhu bika min al-'ajzi wal-kadal, wa a'udhu bika min al-jubni wal-bukhl, wa a'udhu bika min ghalabati ad-dayni wa qahr al-rijal. Meaning, oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from anxiety and
sadness,
from anxiety and sadness, or anxiety and difficulty, and debt, and
cowardice, and
feeling powerless or feeling incapacitated, and that Allah gives you strength in your heart and in your soul to be able to face these challenges. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your creator, so you connect with Him. Through the prayer, through the dhikr, all of this will actually manage for you to deal with these painful memories, let's say, or painful episodes in your life. And we don't discount that there is mental health issues, and Islam looks at these as any other disease, where if you have a mental disease, then you have to treat it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send a disease except that He sent a cure with it. People know or people don't know.
Yeah.
So you will seek help from professionals, seek help from people that can help you through, go through this journey, and know that you can't do it alone. You have to always be with someone that can help you. You have to trust that someone can help you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is blessing you and blessing that someone to go and be helped. So yeah, there is hope, and we should not really feel like there's no hope at all.
Yeah.
So Sheikh, that brings up another, I don't know if this is a misconception or if it's true or what, but because of this idea of hopelessness that comes from the, atheist, secular, material, environment that we're in now, there's no real purpose to life. Is suicide then less in communities or countries that are still faith-based like the Muslim world? And if so, is that because they have more protective factors like extended families, like, have you ever researched this before?
I don't know the answer, no.
Okay.
I'm guessing the protective factors are there, but again, sometimes it's not just the protective factors that protect someone, but I'm not sure about the answer.
That would be interesting to
Well,
figure out, because the assumption is there's a lot less suicide in Muslim
Right.
countries.
Yeah.
Well, I would attribute that to people believing in the worth of their life, that there is a purpose, that they're living.
But that's
for a
coming from
reason.
religion, it's coming
Yes.
from faith.
And connecting with Allah gives you purpose.
Yeah.
Because Allah created you, and He created that soul, that if you connect with Him, it will give you purpose. A lot of people who are atheists, who don't believe in Allah, you actually stripping them out of purpose in life. And they will come to a point where, okay, I tried this and gave me happiness, but then I'm done. There's void.
They'll say
a lot of people, I read actually in the books that they talk about these things. And say,
life is without
there's that
meaning, but
hope.
it's still worth living.
Exactly. No.
That's the argument that's presented.
That's okay. They're talking about maximizing pleasure. Okay, there's no way maximizing pleasure and avoiding pain can make you grow in life. And without growth, without connecting yourself to responsibility and what do you call it, purpose, you will not feel that you're worthy. And a lot of it is because you feel you're worthless, you think that your life is not worth living. Because, okay, I live in a routine. A lot of people are rich and commit suicide because their life has become so like routine. There's nothing.
There's no growth anymore.
Yeah, no growth
Yeah.
at all. And
There's nothing to look forward
so, it gives you, your connection with Allah gives you purpose. And that's why I think the idea of people not believing in Allah will increase their thought of, committing suicide. I give you an example of that man who lived 100 years. He didn't believe in Allah at all. And he was in Australia, I think. And in Australia, they didn't allow I think
Euthanasia.
Euthanasia, they didn't allow it. So he went to Norway to get euthanized there. And he says, I don't find any reason to live. I'm 100 years old. I want to choose, I want to die on my own terms, he says. He thinks that, okay, this is good. There's no reason for me to live. And if you think about the life of every prophet, the life of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they lived their life very actively until the day they died. Like there was meaning in every minute of their life. A lot of people who live for a meaning and a purpose, their life is full of meaning. And meaning gives you happiness. Honestly, I mean, what is happiness? A lot of people say, that makes me feel happy. Why? Because it gave you meaning. It gave you purpose.
So based on this, Sheikh, this talk about purpose and having purpose of life and being close to Allah or worshiping Allah brings you that purpose. That brings another misconception to light, and that is that if a person was close to Allah, they would not commit suicide, right? But is that the case?
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking about. So we definitely want to make it clear, right, that of course Islam in general as a religion is a protective, it's a protective factor, right? Everything in Islam, like going through suffering, there is meaning, it's expiation of sins. Going through something good is good, going through something bad is still good. So Islam in general is a protective factor, but even if someone is close to Allah, and even if someone is religious and they pray and they find meaning in their day-to-day,
they love their children, all of that good stuff.
It doesn't mean that they're not going to experience suicidal thoughts, because again, we're thinking this is not just about their closeness and the meaning that they're making, but just about the pain that they're going through, right?
Right.
So again, we're not saying that it's normal, and like, yes, if someone is close to Allah, they're still, everyone's still gonna have suicidal thoughts, but it definitely could be possible because of the situations that they're in. And there
Right.
could be people who are the best Muslims and they experience suicidal thoughts every day and they don't do anything about it. They're just like, these are thoughts, they're part of my struggle, and I'm just gonna kind of
Exactly,
go
yeah.
and deal with it. But definitely, yes, of course, having that relationship with Allah and with the Quran, and even like we know the story of Maryam alayhi salam, right? So we know in Surah Maryam that she said, Ya laytani mittu qabla hada wa kuntu nasiyan mansiya. Oh, I wish I could have died before this and just have been completely forgotten because of the pain she was experiencing, right? She was in labor by herself without any help, and just in the emotional pain she was experiencing. So she, one of the best women, right, in this planet, and she was having a suicidal thought, and she even said it out loud, but she didn't act on it, right? So even if you have
Well,
that closeness,
I wouldn't say that she had a suicidal thought.
Okay, sorry.
She wished
Yeah.
that she would.
So
have
here's the
died,
thing.
which
The interesting
means-
thing is suicidal thoughts, I think in psychological terminology, is the idea of I wish that I wasn't here. Because I heard you say that earlier. Is that the case?
That's how I'm explaining, yeah.
No,
So
it's-
not that she wanted to die, like
She wanted to kill
No,
herself.
Yeah.
suicidal thought would be
Yeah.
like someone wanting to kill themselves.
No,
They think
that's
it.
for us. But I think
Right.
in psychology, because earlier in the lecture you
Yeah.
mentioned that if a person says, I wish that I wasn't here, that would be a suicidal thought, right?
Yes, yeah. So I guess
Because-
the
because-
suicidal ideation
Because you
maybe
need
is
to think
more-
that way
yeah.
so you can protect them.
Yeah.
But from a religious point of view, when Maryam said that, she didn't mean that she wanted to kill herself.
Yeah,
Yes,
she just
it was
she
more
she
the
wished that she had
distressful-
died.
It was a distressful thought.
And
Okay, I
the
take that
Prophet
back.
ﷺ
Sorry.
The Prophet mentioned actually that it is not unlikely for someone to wish for death because of pain, because of hardship, difficulty.
Yeah.
He says, لا يتمنى أحدكم الموت. That don't wish for death. If you have to, then say, اللهم أحيني ما كانت الحياة خيرا لي وأمتني ما كان الموت خيرا لي. Like, no one should wish for death or ask Allah for them to die.
And he
But
gives perspective.
they
Even in
should-
that hadith, he says that because you're either doing good, in which case you increase,
Exactly. Wonderful.
or a person is doing bad, in which case a long life will give you
Right.
time to
Exactly.
repent. So either way,
Yes.
a long life is beneficial for you as opposed to dying. But if a person can't find, they're hopeless, then let them
Then he
say,
asked- yeah.
let them say, oh Allah, allow me to live as long as you know that life is good for me, and allow me to die if you know that death
Right.
is better for me. So you're making dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to decree what
Now,
you don't know.
In the case that we should say, yeah, a Muslim can experience suicidal thought. A Muslim can have mental health, where because of the what do you call it, the stigma that we have in the Muslim community about mental health, he may not go and seek help, and he gets depressed, and he gets into swings of where at one point he may feel insanity. What do we call it? A case of temporary insanity, or someone who's schizophrenic, he gets in a mood where they don't know what they're doing. They really don't know what they're doing. They are unaware. They're consciously, they could not be responsible for what they're doing right now. And they commit an act and ends their life. In this case, these people are not responsible for what they have done. We cannot condemn them to hellfire and say these people are going to hellfire because actually when they did that, they are completely unaware of their own doing and can't really make a decision of a conscious decision. But
That's why, Sheikh, by the way, if you noticed, she was saying died by suicide and not committed suicide, right? And that's speaking to the capacity and
Right.
agency.
Yes.
And so I remember being informed before that is to some degree more appropriate language. When we say committed suicide, you're automatically giving that person agency, as opposed
okay.
to died by suicide, in which
Yes,
case,
yeah,
yes.
very good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very good.
So I'm just
That's
articulating,
even better.
yeah.
That's even better. Yes, died.
Because
by
this is
suicide.
what you're
It's
articulating
like
right now.
Died by the accident of stabbing himself.
Because not every time, yeah, you're right. Sometimes they don't have agency over themselves
right, exactly,
anymore.
Right. He did not consciously decide to kill himself. It's just he's overwhelmed with the pain and unaware of what he's doing, then committed an act that ended his life.
Yeah.
Died by suicide. Right. Now the other person who consciously decides to do so and defying that he should really be patient and ask help and ask Allah to cure him and go and seek help, go and seek cure of his condition. In this case, this person will be responsible for that on the day of judgment. Yes.
Okay. And follow-up question to that. So if we do know that someone has died by suicide, so are we allowed to go to their janazah? Can we make dua for them? Like, we still consider them a Muslim, right?
Now, if it is, definitely they're Muslim. They cannot be, you can't really condemn them to hellfire because they committed a major sin. That's what it is, committed a major sin. They still believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, yes, you pray janazah on them. You actually have to pray janazah on them. The ones who are, the Prophet ﷺ did not pray janazah on someone who intentionally killed himself. He didn't do that. On someone who intentionally killed himself, was not patient with the pain, he leaned on his sword and killed himself. That is different. And they say if someone who is reputable in the community, like a famous scholar in the community, to be some type of deterrent where people don't follow suit on that path, then that someone would not pray janazah, but the rest of the people or his family should pray janazah on the person, definitely. But if it is someone who is mentally unstable, then he's responsible. He's not responsible for what he did because he was not aware of what he was doing. And then everybody should really ask Allah to forgive them, pray janazah on them, and make sincere dua that Allah will accept them. Yes.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. I think we ended up with 11 misconceptions about suicide. But I want to open up the floor, inshallah ta'ala. We've got 6 minutes left before the salah, inshallah ta'ala. Anyone has any particular comments or questions? Yes? Sure. Great question, mashallah. So I'm just going to repeat it for the recording. So the prescription that was given earlier about, the Prophet ﷺ would inform some people who felt sadness or what have you to make dhikr. When you tell a person to make dhikr, it's possible that their depression or what have you, that, as a community, we give that as the default kind of response, the knee-jerk response for a person. And then that might not necessarily have the reaction that you want, in the sense that they might feel like, they might interpret that as, not only am I going through everything that I'm going through, but now I'm being told that I'm not even a good enough Muslim. So, how do we strike balance with regards to that? So,
okay, that's a really good question. And I think it's one that's like, it's hard to grapple with, right? Because we're Muslim, we believe that like Islam is like the answer to everything. But then if we're struggling and then we're doing all the right Muslim things and then we still don't feel better, and then people are saying just be more Muslim, it's so hard, right? And so I think kind of the way I see it, and this is just like my perspective, is that in terms of like prayer and all the protective factors that Islam tells us to do, dhikr, prayer, qiyam, dua, all those things, for many people who are going through, I guess, like moderate struggles, that could actually be enough for them, right? In terms of like kind of keeping their mental health balanced and having them like, they're having ups and downs, but it's not too severe. But then there is going to be other people who maybe that's not enough. And that doesn't mean that Islam or dua is not enough. It means that they are now kind of going to that extreme category or higher category where they need actually more support. Just like someone who has a cold versus someone who, I don't want to say has COVID, but there's a difference, right? They need now extra medication. They need now extra support, an extra layer of protection and help. So I think, like you said, it's not just telling them like, do dua, do more dhikr. It's not telling them like what other ways. There's other ways of support for you at that time. It could be therapy. It could be talking to someone. It doesn't even have to be a professional. Not everyone has to go to therapy, but just like talking to someone who has some knowledge, even talking to Sheikh Ibrahim or Sheikh Omar. I'm sure they have stuff to do, but you can still talk to them. That could also be helpful in terms of like finding the extra support, and also just in general, like helping them with like ways to cope with life. For some people, like exercising is so helpful. For others, it's volunteering or finding things that give them meaning and joy. So 100%, I totally agree with you. I think for most of us, and with again the moderate levels, like everything Islam-wise is great and enough. But then if sometimes we're going through a little bit more, we need a little bit more, and that's completely within Islamic like thoughts and means, and that's completely fine too.
Great.
Well, in the case of the hadith, actually, the Prophet ﷺ did not diagnose the person with depression. The person basically was overwhelmed with debt, and he was feeling anxious and stressed. So the Prophet ﷺ, in a way, before the hadith and after the hadith, what the Prophet did with the person, we don't know. But we know that the Prophet ﷺ advised him to do this dua. So this dua is appropriate for that situation. It's not a cure. It is to help the person have perspective, to help the person start with this dua and then start with thinking what need to do to, let's say, pay your debt. Maybe the Prophet ﷺ helped him out paying his debt, or found a program for him, or a situation. So the idea is, when it comes to clinical depression, we're not going to tell the person pray more. And we're not going to judge them that they're not praying and that's why they have depression. And this is the dangerous thing to say, is when you make the person, you isolate the person from the community that he needs support from and love from the most. When you tell him, oh, you're not praying enough, you don't come to the masjid, you're isolating him.
Yeah.
So that's why imams actually, when mental health people come to take their advice, should be very, very careful not to pass judgment on the person, not to even mention if they even pray, not to even mention if they even do anything as regards their duty to Allah. You don't know the level of their mental health. They might be even exempted in the eyes of Allah. We don't know. And that's why we have to be very careful. And that's why imams really need to have mental health training to understand the nature of that. And advise them like you advise anyone with a disease. If someone comes to me with a disease and say, what do I need to do? I will tell them, I'm not a doctor, go consult a doctor. If a person with mental health issue comes to me, I will comfort them, I will acknowledge what they're going through, but then I will tell him, you need to see a psychiatrist, you need to see a professional. You need to not ignore that there is cure for this in the professional field.
Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful.
Jazakallah Khayr. With that, inshallah ta'ala, we wrap at 9 o'clock on the dot, inshallah ta'ala. I just want to give final shout outs for Sister Sarah, if there's any project that you'd like to shout out, or where people can find you if they want to book you, or what.
So we're going to send out on the CLIC WhatsApp groups a flyer that says like some resources, like suicide prevention resources. So if you want more information, there's also a section that says like Muslim therapy organizations. Some are in Houston. So if you need help, or if someone you know needs help, whether you're going through suicidal thoughts or you're having mental health issues, I would strongly recommend to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. I go to therapy myself, I'm saying that to the community. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So yeah, and you could book me if you're interested in a session with me. You could just search my name and then you'll see something to click, inshallah. Yeah.
Something to click, no
Yeah.
pun intended.
And just click that one. It's just like therapy.
No, I meant click. You said the word click, so it's something to click.
Oh.
Yani.
They didn't put me on their website, so.
Allah. Sheikh Ibrahim, you got anything?
My advice to the parents is that always be connected with your children. Always accept them. Always talk to them. Always keep the communication between them and you. Do not isolate them by your authority or your attitude or simple negligence. Always, they're more important. And I have I have what we call a rule of thumb. You give time to what is more important in your life. If your career is more important in your life, you give your career more time. If Allah is more important in your life, you give Him more time. If your wife is more important in your life, you give her more time. If your children and family are more important in your life, you give them more time. You divide your time according to the importance and priorities of importance in your life. So, are your children important to you?
So if I don't give any time to myself, that means I don't prioritize myself?
Ooh.
I don't give myself...
You are actualizing yourself by giving time to your children.
Ya salam.
You're making yourself who you are by giving time to Him.
But give time to yourself
ضربة
too,
معلم.
inshallah.
MashaAllah. Jazakumullah khair. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.